In the early afternoon of April 11th, 1992, a young man in Wichita realized he was missing the cummerband to his tuxedo. Reaching out to his local bridal shop, La Bride d'Elegance, he asked if they could help him out, to which the store clerk happily catered to the man's request, even agreeing to stay open a little later for the customer. When the young man arrived, just after 6 p.m., he realized the lights were off, but the door was unlocked. Upon entering the store, he found it to be empty, until a male approached from the back. The man insisted that the customer follow him to the back of the store, to which the customer was obviously hesitant to do, sensing the situation to be strange. The man then proceeded to pull a long, pistol-looking weapon out from his side, now urging the customer to comply. The customer was able to talk his way back out of the store, where the strange man finally suggested he just leave. Too afraid to report the incident for police for almost an hour, they soon arrived after the call finally came in. They too found the store completely empty. As they combed through the small shop, they then discovered the bodies of 2 females in the back office, both shot in the back of the head execution style. The victims were identified as Patricia Smith, 23 years old, and Patricia Majors, the store's owner, age 32. Patricia Majors had been shot twice in the head, while Patricia Smith had been shot once. Police realized that Patricia Smith was still clinging to life and rushed her to the nearest hospital, but she passed soon after arriving. The woman presumably allowed the suspect to enter the store after hours, thinking it was the man they were waiting for. Police believe the man entered the store thinking only one woman was working. Money had been taken from the register, but as police dug deeper, they didn't feel that money was necessarily the motivation, as a bridal shop would have very little cash in the register compared to a grocery store or gas station, which would have been easier and more profitable targets nearby. Over the phone, the witness was able to provide enough information to the police to create a composite sketch. A young, slender white man with reddish hair, holding an Uzi-type weapon, some sort of pistol, but not an average-looking one. Analysis of the scene recovered 3 .22 caliber shells, but any forensic evidence was short or non-existent. Being 1992, DNA evidence was still very much in its infancy, and things like touch DNA weren't even considered. In the days following, the composite sketch was passed around and fielded for identification, with little to no positive results and no leads. Suspecting the killer could just be passing through the area or from out of town, they ran the case through NCIC, or the National Crime Information Center, which compares similar crimes across a nationwide database. This resulted in a hit to a crime that had happened just 3 days prior, but hours away. The crimes were almost identical and, funnily enough, happened on the same stretch of highway, I-70. In the afternoon of April 8, 1992, a phone call came through to Lucretia Hardin at the Speedway gas station in Indianapolis. Lucretia had been working at Speedway for about the last 6 months, and had become familiar with one of the employees at the neighboring Payless shoe source, Robin Fulder. On the call was the manager from the Payless store, saying he had been calling the store all morning trying to reach Robin, but was not getting an answer. He asked if Lucretia could go next door and see what was going on. Upon entering the store, Lucretia felt something was wrong, and realizing the cash register was open and no one in the store, quickly called police, who arrived in just a few short minutes. Investigating the store, they made their way to a storage room, where they stumbled upon the body of a young woman, shot once in the back of the head, execution style. It was Robin. And just like the crime in Wichita, there was no signs of sexual assault and less than $100 missing from the register. Police once again couldn't find a clear motive as to why Robin would be a victim of a senseless murder for such a small robbery. Police combed through Robin's life looking for any suspects or leads that would put them closer to the murderer, but found nothing that would point to violence. Robin led a clean life, was devoted to her faith, and had no history of abusive boyfriends or drug abuse. Her murder left detectives grasping for answers, and analysis of the scene left them even more puzzled, recovering just a single .22 caliber shell. When Wichita police got the hit on NCIC, they reached out to their Indianapolis counterparts to compare evidence. Looking past the similarities in the crimes, the police wanted to see if the 2 cases were indeed linked, which led them to testing the recovered shells at both scenes. The results definitively tied the cases together, with both sets of .22 caliber shells being tied to the same weapon, meaning they were looking for one person or persons responsible for both robberies and all 3 murders. Beyond that, the police had no other information to go off of, only knowing they were looking for a very specific weapon, as described by the witness from Wichita, and that the killer appeared to operate alone. While trying to track down leads, the police kept their eyes and ears peeled for any similar crimes that would happen, fearing that the killer would not stop until he was caught, and they didn't have to wait long for more evidence to become available. On April 27, 1992, just 16 days after the double murder in Wichita, police were called to a small ceramic store in Terre Haute, Indiana. 40-year-old Mick McCown was a traveling musician and had spent a lot of time on the road playing original songs, but recently found himself back home helping his mother run her ceramic shop. He often found himself at the shop running the day-to-day operations. However, on this particular day, he would find himself at the other end of a gun. A customer went to the ceramic store and upon entering saw a hunched-over body towards the front of the store. Realizing the man was deceased, they called the police, who upon arrival identified the victim as Mick. It appeared that Mick never came face-to-face with the killer, as he was busy with stocking shelves and was shot point-blank in the back of the head. Once again, money had been taken from the register, as well as Mick's wallet, which contained less than $50. The shop was located on a busy street, just off I-70, but there were no witnesses to the murder or identification of the vehicle that might have been used to escape. Once again, police were left with nothing to go on besides a single shell casing from a .22 caliber weapon. Sending the shell out for testing revealed that the senseless murder of Mick was also connected to the previous murders in Wichita, just over 2 weeks ago. Police now realized that they were dealing with a serial killer, who had a wide range, mainly across the I-70 corridor, leading to his moniker, the I-70 Killer. Though the pattern of all three crimes was almost exactly the same, small stores with few employees, the police had trouble trying to figure out why Mick was targeted. They believed that the suspect saw the singular name of Sylvia Ceramics, and that only one woman would be working. Mick often wore his long hair in a ponytail, and from the back, at a distance, could have easily been confused as a female. The same reason the suspect might have chosen the bridal shop and the Payless store, thinking only women would be working and most likely on their own. When the killer realized that Mick was not a female, but indeed was a man, he pulled the trigger to avoid a confrontation, fearing that he could be overpowered, as Mick was most likely larger than him. This, of course, is speculation, but makes sense in comparison to the other crimes and motives. The fact that very little in cash was taken from each robbery and the locations chosen were small stores that didn't see the volume as many larger stores would have made robbery seem like a second thought, or that the real intention was murder, with the cash just being an added benefit to the crimes. Within just days of the murder of Mick McCown, police were once again tipped off about another related crime, stretching the territory of the I-70 killer even further than before. On May 3, 1992, just after 2:30 p.m., the body of 24-year-old Nancy Kitzmiller was found face down in a pool of blood at her workplace, Boot Village, in St. Charles, Missouri, shot once in the back of the head. Nancy was actually scheduled to be off that day, but had switched with a coworker who needed off instead. She opened the store around noon, was seen with a customer around 1:30, and then found dead just an hour later. Boot Village was located in a shopping center just off of I-70. A few $100s were missing from the cash register, and a single .22 caliber shell was found near Nancy's foot, indicating she had been shot almost point blank, execution style. A pair of boots were left on the counter. Police were unable to determine if it was from a prior customer or the suspect himself. 4 days later, in Raytown, Missouri, police would be notified of another killing matching the MO of the I-70 killer. 37-year-old Sarah Blessing was working in a gift shop she owned, store of many colors. A neighboring video store owner was able to confirm with police that he had seen a man pacing back and forth in front of the shopping area before entering the store. The witness heard a pop and then saw the same man flee the store before climbing up a hill towards the direction of I-70. The store owner went to investigate and upon entering the store found the body of Sarah Blessing lying face down, being shot once in the head. A nearby grocery store clerk also witnessed the man climbing the hill back towards I-70. It was confirmed that both Nancy Kitzmiller as well as Sarah Blessing had both been shot with a .22 caliber weapon, matching the same MO of all previous killings and within the same geolocation, which linked these cases to the previous 4 murders. Within less than a month, a single person had traveled the I-70 corridor and targeted small businesses with women working alone, with the exception of the murders of Patricia Smith and Patricia Majors in Wichita, which again, it is believed that the suspect was under the impression only one individual was working that evening. All the victims were petite women with brunette and dark hair, with the exception of Mick McCown, who again is believed to have confused the killer, being mistaken for a woman. All the victims were shot in the back of the head with a .22 caliber weapon, but police have never been able to definitively identify the weapon. A multi-state task force was assembled, trying to link evidence and compare notes about the crimes, reaching out to the FBI for further assistance and making this a national manhunt for a serial killer. Based on the profile completed by the FBI on the suspect, they determined money was not the motivation, but rather the thrill of the kill itself. The suspect would find himself in high-risk situations, killing mainly during the day or afternoon hours in popular shopping areas right off of a busy interstate. The thrill of possibly being seen or caught while acting out the crime giving the killer the ultimate buzz. In addition, the profile determines that the killer sought small, solo females knowing that he would not be overpowered if they were to lose control of the situation, which is easy to be seen in the murder of Mick McCown. The victim most likely never even saw the killer because they feared not being in control of the situation, or losing the power over the victim. Upon realizing it was a man deciding to pull the trigger rather than force them to the back of the store like all the other victims. The profile also assumes the killer had a reason to be in these various locations over the course of the 29 days all the killings took place, driving roughly 1,600 miles in between them on the various dates. The suspect was most likely working, and was somewhat familiar with the I-70 corridor. Profilers even believe they can determine where the man might be from. Once running into trouble in Wichita, where they let a key witness walk from the scene after coming face to face with them, and having a detailed look at their description, they then drive back to Indiana and commit another crime just 70 miles from the first crime on April 8th. It's believed that this shows some sort of connection to the Indianapolis area, somewhere where the killer feels comfortable enough to return to after their most high-stakes encounter. By this point, the press is alive with warnings to the public about the I-70 killer, warning store owners and shops along the I-70 corridor to be on high alert. Almost no storefront allowing their employees to work solo shifts, especially young women. The FBI crime lab begins their own forensic analysis on the recovered shell casings, and finds a connection that was missed, an unusual red substance covering the shells, which is determined to be jeweller's rouge, a common jewelry and metal polish, which was determined to help the cartridge feed through the gun easier, most likely in an attempt to keep the gun from jamming. The FBI then comes up with a list of 7 to 8 firearms that could have possibly been used in the killings, with all but 2 being ruled out as they were revolvers, which would not dispense a shell casing upon being fired. Based on the witness from Wichita and their description of the weapon, being that it looked more like an Uzi or a pistol with a foregrip, the police were able to narrow it down to 1 of 2 possibilities. It is believed that the weapon used is most likely an Intratec Scorpion, or an Irma Werka ET-22 pistol, the latter of these being a very rare and unique type of firearm. The Irma Werka ET-22 is a German naval pistol, and is quite peculiar looking, usually valued as a collectible rather than a murder weapon. It is roughly 1.5 to 2 feet long with a wooden foregrip, making it look more like a rifle, but it is indeed a pistol. In total, only roughly 6,000 of these unique firearms were ever imported to the US, which makes this an exceedingly rare weapon of choice and a rather bizarre one at that. Not only is it a strange weapon to use for murder, but the mechanics and firing of the gun are often seen as poor, meaning it would jam often, which could explain the use of jeweller's rouge on the casings to prevent that from happening. This points to a rather sinister intent. Just as detectives had presumed, the killer planned on firing his weapon, and that the robberies were just afterthought, the true intention being murder. However, with all this information, there has never been a prime suspect in the case, and while there is little information to go on, the case is still active and being worked. In 2021, a new task force was formed, and has been taking any credible lead as far as it will go. The suspect could either be a thrill-seeking employed individual traveling the I-70 corridor for work or to visit family, or perhaps a substance abuser living in and having family in the area. The fact that the killer seemed to have viable transportation, a rare firearm, and was always described as clean-cut, points to the former being the most likely scenario. While there's no confirmation the suspect hasn't committed more crimes outside of these 6 murders, these are the ones that have been attributed to them. However, there are 2 similar crimes that Wichita and Indianapolis police feel have some connection, though there are a few things that stand in the way of positively connecting them. In 1993 and 1994, there were 3 separate murders in Texas that similarly matched the MO of the I-70 killer, primarily the January 15th attempted murder of Vicki Webb. Vicki owned a shop in the Houston area called Alternatives. In the afternoon, a man walked in and stated he was waiting for his niece. The suspect spoke with Vicki for a few minutes about her store and how much traffic she would usually see in a day, before selecting a picture frame and stating he would like to purchase it. As Vicki walked to the counter to help bring him out, she was shot in the back of the neck. The man then proceeded to dig through the cash register before flipping Vicki over and starting to undo her trousers. The killer then pointed the gun at her forehead and pulled the trigger, but the weapon jammed. The would-be killer letting out a maniacal laugh before hearing a car door close outside and fleeing the shop. Vicky, however, was not dead, and very conscious throughout the whole incident, playing dead to save her life until a young couple came in and called 911. Vicky survived her attacker and spent months recovering, sitting through physical therapy sessions and relearning how to walk and use the bathroom again. Within a few months, she was back to work in her shop when she received a call from the Wichita Police Department, asking if they could meet. Vicky divulged everything that happened that fateful day in January to the Wichita detectives, and police were quick to show her their composite of the I-70 killer compared to her composite done by the Houston Police Department. Vicky stated that neither composite looked like her attacker 100%, but perhaps somewhere in between the two. Police were able to confirm that the weapon used was indeed a .22 caliber, but they had no shell casing left at the scene, which proved difficult to test against the evidence for the I-70 killer. Though the MO is very similar, there seemed to be a sexual motive to the crime in Houston, something that didn't exist in the previous 6 murders just 2 years prior. Police can't discount, however, that killers tend to grow and MOs change, but the cases are just different enough to have doubts. Not to mention that I-70 is quite a ways from anywhere in Texas. The other connected murder actually takes us back to the tiny town of Terre Haute, Indiana, and almost a decade after the first murder, in November of 2001. In the early evening at the 7th and 70th liquor store, employee Billy Brossman was working alone when a man entered the store. The man, with no coverings or disguise, walked to the back cooler and grabbed a 6-pack of beer before heading to the register. Within 5 seconds of placing the beer on the counter, the man brandishes a gun and demands Billy empty the register. Billy complies fully, and even comes around from the back of the counter as the man instructs him to do. With a gun pointed at his back, he's forced to walk to the back of the store to the coolers, and is then shot once in the back of the head. The suspect then flees, leaving the beer on the counter, but not realizing he's left his face on the store's security camera. Police were quick to view the footage, and put out a bolo for the man on local news. The Terre Haute Police Department realized quickly that the crime was eerily similar to that of Mick McCown, which happened just 7 blocks away. Just like the attempted murder in Houston, though, a couple things didn't add up or match the original MO of the I-70 killer. Particularly the fact that Billy was a large male and not a petite female, and the fact that the killer's face has been captured on CCTV. Though the leads came in and were followed up, Billy Brossman's murder still goes unsolved, and is not definitively connected to the I-70 killer. As of 2022, the Terre Haute Police Department states they have a person of interest in the murder, though they are not in custody. This person of interest has never been named. There are other cases in Texas as well that have taken place off of Interstate I-45 and I-35 that have very similar MOs to that of the I-70 killer. One such murder came just a day after the I-70 killer was featured by Robert Stack on the popular Unsolved Mysteries show. However, Texas authorities are almost confident that these crimes are not related to the crimes that took place off of I-70, leading them to just be a possible coincidence. With that being said, it wouldn't be impossible for a killer to pick up and move far away from where they once operated. There are plenty of cases and documentation showing some serial killers operating in a vast area, or even traveling to separate areas to commit their crimes, but once again, Texas authorities have no interest in linking these cases to that of the I-70 killer, and have repeatedly claimed they will handle the investigations into these themselves. Despite no positive leads or suspects in the case, there have been several suggestions and even admissions to the original I-70 killings. One such confession came from an inmate who had been found guilty of several assaults and armed robberies and was sentenced to life at Leavenworth. When investigators got word that this individual was boasting that he was in fact the I-70 killer, they went to see if he was telling the truth. Unfortunately for detectives, they soon found that this person's story and what the evidence showed didn't line up. They realized that this inmate was looking for the death penalty, and would admit to several more crimes they most likely never committed in order to get it, before committing suicide years later in prison. There is also the potential link between the recently named I-65 killer and the I-70 killer, not only in their geographical similarities but also in the killer's MO, though there are also enough differences to remain leery that they could be one and the same. Harry Edward Greenwell was determined to be the man responsible for 3 murders of hotel clerks after genealogical DNA and crime scene evidence was linked to him. He is often referred to as the Days Inn killer, as he perpetrated 2 murders at 2 separate Days Inn locations, as well as a Super 8 motel across the I-65 corridor in Indiana from 1986 to 1990. Greenwell would travel to different hotels where he would find young women working alone and then take advantage of them, beating them, sexually assaulting them, and in some cases murdering them. His last confirmed attack was 1990, but the victim survived, being able to give a detailed description of the attacker. Greenwell died of cancer in 2013, never having to answer for these specific crimes, but did spend most of his life in and out of prison for a variety of other crimes. The task force has turned a keen eye towards Greenwell, but do note the sexual component to his crimes is a different MO as opposed to that of the I-70 killer, which in each of the 6 linked murders was not sexual in nature. Until verifiable DNA evidence is brought forward, we can't conclusively say if Greenwell has any connection to this case, or if he was just committing his own pattern of disturbing attacks keeping Indiana police busy throughout the 80s and 90s. Beyond that, all we have is the original witness description from the man in the bridal store, as well as the owner of the nearby video store in Raytown, Missouri. Police have attempted to track down the specific weapon used in the crime, with little to no success. Most collectible firearms like these are either held in private collections or bought and sold at gun shows across the country, not needing any identification in most states to purchase them, leaving the search for this peculiar weapon like looking for a needle in a haystack. The task force that came together in 2021 has remained firm that they will find the killer, and they won't stop investigating until they do, having detectives working each new lead that comes in and even hosting a meeting between all 5 jurisdictions to compare evidence and notes. At this specific meeting, it was determined what evidence would have the highest success of being tested for potential DNA evidence. Investigators determined that the pants Mick McGowan was wearing would be a viable option, as the killer had to have put his hand in his pocket to get his wallet out. The other substantial piece of evidence would be the wedding veil, which was possibly handled by the killer when he fired his gun. As to how or why that evidence was gathered and determined is not attainable, but as of this writing at the end of November 2023, there has been no update into DNA testing. Usually this would mean that either a sample was unable to be collected, is only impartial, or has been acquired but not matched conclusively to any one specific person. Being that 1992 was just 30 years ago, and as of 2023 there has been a substantial number of cold cases brought to justice, we can only remain hopeful that this case will also be included in that list. Detectives seem determined, and there is plenty of information and witness descriptions to go off of. The killer, who at the time was stated to be possibly around 20 to 30 years old, would now be in his 50s or 60s. The task force was able to do an age-progressed composite off the original, and it has been circulating since 2021, but no positive IDs have been reported. There is currently a $25,000 reward for any information that leads to the arrest of the I-70 killer, and the cases remain open. For over 30 years, the victims and their families have gone without justice for what seemed like nothing more than violent and senseless crimes. If you recognize the man in the sketch, know someone in possession of an Irma Werka ET-22, or have any information that can lead to an arrest in this case, please contact the St. Charles Police Department at 1-800-800-3510. Until then, Polygraph investigates.